After a very interesting morning where we addressed the link between sustainability and consumption, we return now this afternoon to a session focused on circular economy. So my name is Anne-Lise. I am a researcher on innovation in circular economy and a member of the scientific committee of the conference. And I will be the moderator of this afternoon first circular economy panel that will be dedicated to policies. In this first panel, we will have 4 presentations followed by a debate period. We are really interested in receiving the audience input. For all of you that are online today, we would like to invite you to submit your remarks and questions using the Zoom option of Q&A at any point during the talks. Please, beside your questions, leave also some information about where you are from and to whom your question is, or if it is a question for the panel. And we will do our best to address as many questions as possible in the debate period. So moving on, I would like to give a very special welcome to the speakers of this session. I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to meet you all. Well, we might not be in the same room, but we can fortunately still exchange views, and I think that is as important as ever in these very trying times. So, as I mentioned, this is the first panel on circular economy theme of the conference. So it will have also the objective to introduce a little bit the circular economy concept and give a broad overview of the approach. But we'll be focused specifically on the importance and challenges of policies and regulations in the transition to a circular economy, as well as the challenges to policies, either sectorial barriers, as well as limitations concerning the evaluation of circular economy performance. So without further delay, I would like to introduce our panel. Well, we had the last minute change, and Paulo de Silva Lemos from DG Environment will fill in for William Neal. And with us today is also Guilherme Oliveira Costa, an associate lawyer in European and competition law at the law firm Sérvulo and Associados. With us today, we have also Marvin, an academic from the Utrecht University in the Netherlands, and also a senior consultant at McKinsey that have been focusing his research on sustainability transitions and innovation ecosystems. And Maryna Henrysson, a senior researcher at the Energy System Division at KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden, that is now focusing her research on collaborative governance of innovation in industrial strategies, especially in urban and regional energy systems. Without further delay, I will pass the word to Paulo and the first presentation concerning European policies for a circular transition and a circular recovery. Paulo, welcome. Paulo, you have to unmute.
Hello, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm trying to find my PowerPoint. Here. So, as I was saying, I hope you are seeing. I work in the European Commission in the department related with circular economy. And I'll make a presentation on the initiatives that the European Commission is taking in this area. As you know, the linear model that is still dominant today is the source of most of our environmental problems. So as you can see, the linear economy promotes the rapid obsolescence and end of life of the products, while a circular economy tries to keep the products in the loop and in the economy as long as possible to keep their value. And the extraction of resources is one major source of environmental impacts. Is a major contribution to climate change. 50% of the emissions are related with the extraction and transformation of the resources. The increase of the extraction and the consumption of resources has been enormous, 3 times from 1970 to 2017. The increase of the waste generation has been of 70% it will be 70% by 2050. More than 90% of the biodiversity loss is due to the extraction and processing of materials, also the water stress. And in the EU, and the EU is one of the most advanced economies in terms of sustainability, only 12% of the materials used come from recycling, which is not the only source of circularity, as you know, but I'll speak later on this. And as everybody also knows, we have only one planet, but for the moment we are consuming already 1.6 planets, but if we don't do anything by 2015, we'll be consuming the equivalent of 3 planets. So the Commission, one of the first actions of this Commission was to come out with the European Green Deal, that it was presented by our President of the Commission, and it was associated with, it was considered by our President as the man on the moon option moment of the European Union, meaning a transformational and motivational moment for the EU, like it was the race to the moon in the United States, launched by the former President Kennedy. The European Green Deal has an overreaching strategy to address most of, or almost all of the environmental challenges that we have, that go from the climate to the question of biodiversity, to the question of food waste, sustainable food, to the buildings, to the mobility, to the circular economy. And since 2019, so the European Green Deal was presented at the end of 2019, a lot has already been done. Some of the promised strategies were already delivered, like the biodiversity strategy, the farm to fork strategy related with the food systems and the sustainability of the food systems, the renovation wave related with the buildings to make buildings more sustainable and more efficient, chemical strategy for sustainability, meaning how to avoid the use of hazardous chemicals in the products that we are using, a proposal on batteries, mostly related with the future that we see in the batteries for the automotive electric vehicles, and at international level, because we are aware that at international we cannot transform the world, only the EU. We have to get together the other countries. We launched the Global Alliance on Circular Economy. And of course, we presented the Circular Economy Action Plan in March last year. The Circular Economy Action Plan is the second Circular Economy Action Plan of the Commission. The first was presented in December 2015. It had by then around 74 actions that were delivered until 2019 or were being implemented. And this new Circular Economy Action Plan comes with more actions. Most of all, we try to put the focus on the sustainability of the products, meaning that we are trying to pass from a perspective that circular economy is only recycling to the perspective that there are higher levels of the waste hierarchy, namely prevention, reuse, refurbishment, and this is one of the main initiatives, make sustainable products the norm in the European Union. Then to empower consumers and public buyers, it's other actions on this area. Focus on the value chain products, like we did on plastics in the last strategy action plan, where we prepared the plastic strategy taking into account the inputs from the civil society, from the companies, and from the political parties and member states. This strategy was presented in 2018 and was considered from the NGOs to the value chain of plastics, and even from all the parties represented in the European Parliament, as a big achievement that the EU made. And we want to put the focus now on other value chains that are also unsustainable. The first we are working with is textiles. We are preparing a strategy on textiles already with the stakeholders. The question of reducing the waste and to promote circularity for people, regions, and cities. So I'll focus on some actions that have more relevance in terms of consumer, namely the Sustainable Product Initiative that, let's say, is our flagship of this Circular Economy Action Plan, because we want to promote that the products that are put on the market of the European Union are increasingly more sustainable. This will be made in principle by widening the focus of the Eco-Design Directive. The Eco-Design Directive has been very successful in terms of energy efficiency. We have managed with this directive to reduce the consumption in Europe, equivalent, for instance, to Sweden and Italy almost together. So it's very effective, but we want to add the material efficiency also to the concerns of the directive, of this directive, in order to make products more sustainable and not only energy efficient. And the adoption is planned for the end of this year. We are working on it. How we will incentivize this sustainability of the products? By focusing on durability, reusability, upgradability, and repairability. There are several studies that show that, for instance, that the average lifetime of the electronics mostly is being reduced. People use less the products before throwing them away or just stop using them and buying new ones. There are studies that show that, for instance, if we increase the lifetime of smartphones that now have an average lifetime of 3 years, if we increase 1 more year the lifetime of a smartphone, we can save 2 million tons of CO2. And if we do this to other appliances like washing machines, laptops, tablets, and vacuum cleaners, we can reduce the emissions, the CO2 emissions, the equivalent of 2 million cars in the streets per year. So the durability is very important, and we can only increase durability if indeed we promote reuse, upgrade, and repairability of the products. Then the question of hazardous chemicals in the products. I already spoke. There is a problem in terms of health, but there is also a problem in terms of circular economy, because if a product contains certain chemicals, it cannot be recycled. It has to be either burned or landfilled, and increase on recycled content. There are areas where recycled content is already significant, like for instance steel and aluminium, but other areas such as plastic, the percentage of recycled content is around 9-10% at this moment, and we want to increase it. Actually, one of the actions for implementation of the Single-Use Plastic Directive promoted mandatory recycled content for bottles, 25% by 2025 for PET bottles and 30% by 2030 for all bottles. But we are working on increasing recycled content in all the products. Then the question of single use, as I told you, there was the directive on single-use plastic that is banning certain plastics and restricting others, and counter premature obsolescence. Everybody already had this experience of buying something that after 5 years has some problem, that it's more costly to repair this product than to buy a new one. incentivize business models such as product as a service. Product as a service is the opposite of ownership. We want to promote that people, instead of, for instance, owning a car, they require the service of mobility. This applies to different range of areas, but for instance, in the automobile sector, some companies are already seeing their future as not selling cars, but offering mobility. That's why so many companies already did their own sharing vehicles and other alternatives companies. And digitalization. Digitalization is very important because digitalization can bring a lot of reductions in the consumption of materials and consequent CO2 emissions. But at the same time, we have also to discuss what could be the consequences of increased dependence on digitalization because of the energy consumption and other materials that the digital technologies bring. So we have to balance these two approaches, and the Commission is working very closely, the DG Environment and DG Connect, and the TAR Environment and the DG that is related with these technologies, including product passport. The product passport is something that is also promised in the framework of the Sustainable Product Initiative. It's let's say, a revolution in terms of the information that can circulate in the value chain and to the consumers, because the product passport essentially transmits the information that was put in the beginning of when the product enters in the market, and transmits along the value chain. For instance, if it arrives at the end of life, the company that takes care of the end of life of this product knows where are the essential and more important materials, where are the sensitive materials, if it contains hazardous substances or not, so it can recycle, but it can also give important information for upgradability, for repairability, and for reuse. For instance, there are already apps in some countries that when you have your smartphone, if you want to sell it, the app itself does the evaluation of the smartphone that you have and gives you, let's say, the price that you could get from it. And this incentivizes the reuse of these products. At the same time, the digital product passport also can give information about the sustainability of the product. So when a consumer wants to buy something, in principle it will be a barcode. He just passes his smartphone on this and he has all the information he wants to know. For instance, if it where is the country where it was produced, what is the life cycle impact of the product, what are the CO2 emissions from the production and from the use, and all other aspects that a person needs to decide if he wants to make if he wants to buy something that is sustainable. But at the same time, it has could also have dynamic information, meaning not only the information that is put in the beginning when the product is placed on the market, but information on the evolution of the product. That is important, for instance, for batteries. That the proposal on batteries, we already foresee a product passport for batteries, electric batteries, because when the batteries end their life cycle in terms of car batteries, they can still have a function in terms of storing energy in houses, for instance. And it is important to know when there is this shift, how many chargings were made in this battery, and what is the possible life, useful life of this battery. Another action that we are foreseeing is empowering consumers. So we are going to revise the consumer law in order to allow that consumers can receive more trustworthy information at the point of sale. The product passport will be an instrument for this, but other sources could also help. To establish a right to repair. precisely to counter this idea that it's not worth to repair because the spare parts no longer exist or they are too expensive, and people are incentivized to buy new products instead of repairing their own products, and sometimes it's just some small euros and you'll have the product functioning more time. And also the question of the green claims. For the moment, everybody can claim that their products are the more ecological products in the market, and there is no way to verify that. And so people tend to be, could be wronged. And what we are preparing is a proposal, legal proposal, that we hope that it will be ready. When I mean ready, it's EU time, meaning ready on the point of the Commission. The Commission presents the proposal, and then there is a discussion with the Parliament and with the Council, so it takes longer. But our proposal, we hope to present it by the middle of this year. And so if somebody wants to claim that their product is ecological, they have to use a methodology that is called the product environmental footprint. There is a sort of life cycle assessment, but upgraded life cycle assessment that we developed in the Commission together with companies. And only if they pass, let's say, this exam, they will be awarded this green claim. And also,
please, Paulo, sorry, we are getting a little bit over the time, so I will ask you to finish, and you can address these issues maybe in the discussion period. Thank you.
So just to refer to the taxonomy, we recently approved the Taxonomy Regulation. It will be a way for the companies that want to invest, or for people that want to invest in the companies, to know if they are really sustainable, or if they have problems with some areas of the environment. So we defined areas to qualify as green. The company or the investment of this company has to contribute for one of these objectives, and with that it will be easier for instance, to buy stocks from a company or to support investment of a company. This will be applied to the funds that the EU is promoting to the companies, and also in the framework of the recovery plan. In terms of circular economy, there are also rules to be considered investments in the circular economy, and as I said, the recovery plan that is coming will take into consideration all these questions of sustainability, and as our president said, the future of Europe is green and digital, and that's how the recovery plan sees the future of Europe, and that's where the funds are going to be invested. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Paulo. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. We'll go right into Guilherme Oliveira Costa presentation concerning battery regulation. Guilherme, welcome.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to you all, especially to my colleague of the panel, and to all of those who join us here today. I would like to thank to the scientific committee, in particular Professor Jorge Moraes Carvalho and Ana de Jesus, for having me at this conference. As an Novas alumni, it is both a pleasure and a responsibility to be here presenting to you some of the challenges that arise from the proposal for a batteries regulation. Well, in late 2019, when probably most of us haven't heard from coronavirus yet, the European Commission adopted the today well-known European Green Deal, which has, among others, as a structural pillar, a circular and clean economy. This pillar is crucial to achieve the goals foreseen in the European Green Deal due to the systemic effects that the circular economy brings to the value chains of different industries. Well, fast forward 1 year, and after long and exhausting confinements, the European Commission took its first tangible step regarding this pillar. a proposal for a regulation to modernize the EU legislation concerning all types of batteries. Significant impacts and challenges are expected given the cross-cutting nature of economic sectors where batteries are essential, as for example the transport sector, which is responsible for 25% of the greenhouse gas emissions across the EU. Actually, it is hard to think of industries or daily activities that somehow don't involve the use of batteries. Well, the first point that I would like to address is the change of legal instruments. Until now, EU legislation on this matter has been developed through directives, Directive 2006-66 being our batteries directive, being the most recent one, and that will be repealed. And such change will represent a shift on the rules applicable in the internal market with a desired greater uniformity and legal certainty. Therefore, the Commission proposes a maximum harmonization framework where member states are not free to impose additional restrictions, representing a decisive boost to the creation of the genuine internal market for batteries. This choice results from the evaluation and impact assessment of the Batteries Directive, which conclude that the regulation would be more suitable to the harmonization. Diverging national measures led to an incoherent regulatory framework that were appointed as some of the principal problems in the previous regime. Moreover, a regulation will set direct requirements to all the operators in all the member states at the same time. Concerning the legal basis, there are also changes, and the proposed regulation is only based on Article 114 TFEU, while the Batteries Directive had as legal basis current Article 191, which is related with environment, and also, but subsidiarily, Article 114. This means that the Commission is tackling this issue as an internal markets problem and not necessarily as an environmental one. Indeed, in its explanatory memorandum, the Commission clarifies that the proposal tackles a number of key problems related to the single market, for example, lack of incentives or a need for economies of scale, and also address environmental problems. But those problems can all be linked to the function of the single market since they drift from market failures. By other words, the internal market objectives are predominant in this proposal, while the environmental benefits are complementary. As it is well known, the choice of legal basis can be sometimes a controversial procedure, and as such, one must be aware for debate and challenges concerning it, especially given the fact that it can be argued that some chapters, as Chapter 7, for example, can be framed as purely related with environmental issues. The main objective of this proposed regulation is to ensure that batteries available on the EU internal market become sustainable, circular, high performance, and safe throughout their entire life cycle. And as Article 1 clarifies, this will be made through the establishment of requirements on sustainability, safety, labeling, and information, as well as requirements for the collection, treatment, and recycling of waste batteries. The proposed regulation shall be applicable to all kinds of batteries, regardless their characteristics, with only two exceptions: equipment connected with member state security, especially military purposes, and equipment designed to be sent into space. As it could not be otherwise when it happens with EU legislation, Article 2 has a long list of the definitions, which are important when analyzing the proposed regulation to understand what is, for example, an industrial battery or a portable battery, and so on. That sometimes can be almost a witchcraft exercise, so the list of the definitions is important. Given the aforementioned, it is critical to access the real dimension of the step given by the European Commission to promote a truly circular economy in the batteries industry and how it can solve the problems identified in the Commission's explanatory memorandum. The proposal is very extensive, so I will focus on some topics that I found more interesting and pertinent in the context of the circular economy and which constitute a novelty or an update from the Batteries Directive. One interesting innovation is Article 11, which determines that portable batteries incorporated in devices, for example, the batteries of mobile phones, shall be readily removable and replaced by the end user or by independent operators during the lifetime of the device when batteries have a shorter lifetime than the device. It means that companies must guarantee that after the battery's removal, it can be substituted by a similar battery without affecting the functioning or the performance of the device. This could have a significant impact in some business models. For example, Apple with iPhones, since currently only licensed Apple stores can do it with guarantees of good function afterwards. This may help, as was addressed by Paulo in the previous session, reducing consumption, since with better replacement of batteries, there will be less need to buy new products, making the economy more circular. Well, Article 14 is also worth noting, since this new provision establishes that some batteries shall include a battery management system containing data on the parameters for determining the state of health and expected lifetime of batteries. Such information is available both to evaluate the state of a battery in a given moment and to facilitate its reuse, repurposing, or remanufacturing, which is of paramount importance to achieve a desired circularity. When analyzing improvements from the Batteries Directive, Chapter 7 is Articles 46 to 63 is essential to be referred due to its holistic approach. Indeed, it governs batteries from its beginning to its very end, including the possibility of a second life to batteries that can be reintegrated in other materials, being batteries or not. We are dealing here with collection schemes and targets, removal of waste batteries, or recycling, all obligations that were already present in the Batteries Directive, but that now, due to the difference of the instrument's legal nature, are much more densified. This is a very good example of what was said before concerning the advantage of having this matter dealt by means of a regulation, since the mechanisms at hand will be handled in a uniform way in all the European Union. This will be fundamental since, for example, according to Article 8, future batteries shall present a minimum levels of recycled content, helping to diminish the use of raw materials that will only be possible with an efficient end-of-life management system. A last note concerning Chapter 7 that is related with Article 5, under what member states shall designate at least one competent authority responsible to carry out the obligations that result from Chapter 7 and monitor the compliance of the producers with requirements of such chapter. This represents a commitment and a sign that this new set of rules shall be taken seriously. An additional challenge for the regulation's effect in its first years that I would like to highlight is the different timings of implementation throughout the regulation, which may lead to a complex legal framework with regimes from different legal instruments being enforced at the same time. Firstly, the regulation shall be applicable from January 2022, but the Batteries Directive will only be repealed on 1st of July 2023, and some of its rules will continue to be applicable until the end of 2025 and 2026. Additionally, some of the most relevant obligations, basically Article 7 to 10 and Article 13 of the proposed regulation, concerning the materials that can be used to produce batteries, their carbon footprint, requirements related with performance and durability, or even labeling, will only be applicable on 2026 or even 2027. It is crucial then to give time to all the market players to adapt themselves to this new context, but therefore one should also adapt the expectations regarding this proposed regulation in first years, since it may take several years until meaningful impact to be observed. Indeed, the extra effort that the regulation's implementation will require from the different stakeholders, which is especially relevant in a crisis context that can be foreseen after Corona, may pose another challenge, a resistance to change, increasing the risk of greenwashing. In the current zeitgeist, there is a pressure upon governments, companies, and citizens to advertise their policies, products, or actions greener than what they really are. As such, an eventual hurry with implementation could be counterproductive to the regulation's good intentions. As such, in order to increase transparency in the internal market, from January 2026, all the industrial and electrical vehicle batteries whose capacity is higher than 2 kWh should have a unique a unique electronic record for each individual battery that is placed in the market, that is called the battery passport. The access to information via QR code placed in the battery in accordance with Article 13 will be a mandatory requirement for the introduction of batteries in the internal market. An articulation between the changes set up in the proposed regulation and the new EU funds, as the InvestEU or the Next Generation EU, is critical. Companies should seize the opportunity that results from a fresh new period of investment to modernize and adapt their internal procedures, as well as to bet in the promotion of large-scale investments. A more clear and uniform legal landscape is a clear incentive to it. The impact for a circular economy may also go beyond EU borders, as many companies can find it more advantageous to market batteries worldwide with the standards required by the EU. However, a negative discrimination towards the European industry may also be an outcome of the new regulatory environment, which would harm all consumers all over the EU. Imagine, for example, that due to the obligations imposed by Article 11 that we have seen before, Apple decided to increase the prices of iPhones in the European internal market. Lastly, one cannot ignore that we are still dealing with a proposal, meaning that this is not final, and most probably some of the proposals of the Commission will be altered during the discussions with the Council and the Parliament. It has been made public that in a recent Council debate in March, several member states expressed their concern regarding unworkable targets and deadlines proposed by the Commissions, and that those unworkable targets would increase bureaucratic costs for batteries producers. It seems that there are also other member states concerned that adoption of harmonized standards will not be efficient due to the different capacities among EU member states. Actually, the intense debate that is occurring in the Council may lead to several alterations from the implementation schedule and also the legal basis and other aspects. With this in mind, in the near future, special attention shall be paid to the possible differences between the proposal and the final version of the regulations, which probably will only be approved in the end of the year. And in a more distant future, one must assess if the problems identified by the Commission are being effectively solved or at least mitigated, and if then we have a more circular economy in this domain that we have today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Guilherme. Again, I would like to ask the audience to encourage the audience to leave their questions in the Q&A Zoom feature as to promote a lively debate in the end of the presentations. And now I'll leave the floor to Marvin on circular policies in the context of circular startups. Welcome, Marvin.
Thank you very much, Anna, and also to George and the scientific committee. First of all, thank you for the kind invite and the panelists for joining, as well to your audience. As Anna already indicated, I will be talking about startups and their roles or potential roles also in policy making towards the circular economy. First of all, can you see my screen, Anna? Maybe just to make sure you see the slides. I see you nodding. That's good.
Yes. Yeah. It's working fine.
A bit of context before I really go into what we found with our research. So I'm a part of the innovation studies group at Utrecht University, and focusing my research on circular economy startups and also on their potential systemic impact. And here the topic of policy also comes into play, basically. So we were, after analyzing business models, motivations of founders, trying to embed circular startups in a systemic context. And here the concept of mission-oriented innovation systems is the one we pull in. I will tell a bit about the background in a second. And this concept basically was built or originated in the context of mission-oriented innovation policy. which thank you, Paulo, already for the intro. The EU, for example, takes up at the moment, or is a general trend that happens in practice, and also the scientific field around this topic is very dynamic right now. The general idea is that governmental intervention into systems is more co-creative and is really shaping innovation systems in specific ways to address societal challenges. And this deviates from the past practices of pure kind of market fixing or leveling playing fields, but goes a step further. Why did that topic kind of occur is that the typical tools in policy were not really sufficient anymore to address the increasing complexity of potential system failures. So fundamental processes like when we address climate change, health, food, resource depletion is another example here, now bring along also more complex failure in comparison to, for example, the Man on the Moon mission, which was kind of early ways of really a mission policy, where the goal is very clear, the stakeholder network is not as complex, and it's really, and the means to get there have to be based on innovation, but the parties to involve are already quite fixed. The new kind of forms of mission-oriented innovation policy are broader than that, as it says here. Also, they have more far-reaching objectives. So circular economy transformations are the kind of perfect example. There are states like the Netherlands who already set that out, being circular by 2050. And I think we can all agree at the moment, we cannot really say what that exactly means. And that's also the characteristic of this policy. The other topic around stakeholder coordination already mentioned. Also strong directionality is another clear characteristic of this kind of policy making. And as I said, the CE transformation, circular economy transformation, can be considered such a fundamental process and has been analyzed very much from the kind of top down. So barriers have been scrutinized, corporate approaches. There are lots of corporate groups that form to pursue circular goals. But the kind of conditions in which fully circular innovations really thrive have not really been scrutinized in depth. And bottom-up experimentation learning is as relevant as the kind of top-down approach to increase serendipity, to allow for feedback loops for innovation, right? And this was basically the premise where we set out analyzing circular startups, which are more holistically oriented towards circular economy, make it already work in a business context, and then really look into their stakeholder interactions to identify system boundaries, directionality, regulatory barriers, which I think are all relevant topics for policy creation in this context, or that's supposed to support circular economy. Just to give you an idea of who we talk to, here are some examples and some snippets. So business models can include reusable batteries that are fully modular, so also featuring, probably interesting for you, Guilherme, cooling material and insulation material made from waste feathers, construction, housing, basically, that can be built out of mushroom roots, but also platform-based models with open source material databases, or more classic service-based business models, for example, for mobility, ride sharing, and so on, which increase the usage efficiency of certain artifacts. What do we do basically to find really systemic embedding and systemic relevance for startups, which obviously, I mean, they have now started raising raising eyebrows, and also the respective money that leads to that, meaning that there have been now some seed fundings and Series A, B fundings for circular economy startups that are really something that appears on the global PE, private equity, venture capital forum, so to say. So they're kind of reaching the surface. But to see what the systemic impact is, we had to really take a conceptual approach mostly, rather than the actual impact they have in their ecosystems. Why is this relevant? Because these organizations, they establish circular practices and also create institutional legitimacy. We found that most of the startups pursue innovation types that require customer empowerment or customer involvement, or supply chain collaboration in terms of the usage of residual resource streams. And consider these startups now as system builders. What we found is that many of them basically build the relevant ecosystems they operate in from scratch. So they connect new supply chains, they lead to a multi-dimensionalization of supply chains which have not been connected before, and thereby also reveal opportunities for increased material efficiency. Right? And then interesting, and this probably also brings us to the context of today's talk, is that particularly governmental bodies and regulatory bodies were mentioned by the startups that we interviewed as highly relevant. Apart from customer suppliers, in fact, the number 3 on the kind of relevance in the stakeholder network. And that really led us to take a deeper look into this. And therefore, as I said in the beginning, we pulled in this concept of circular mission-oriented innovation systems and consider startups basically as creators of minimum viable systems that are based on the principles of circularity by connecting on potential list of players you see here, obviously customer suppliers, but also closely relating with scientific institutions, with incumbents and corporates whose residual resource streams are often a relevant and valuable input for the startups. This is then their kind of institutional environment that they operate in, and is shaped by systemic functions. We pulled that in to allow for an analysis of the dynamics of the interrelations of startups with their respective stakeholders. So what would a company need or an organization from its system in order to thrive? This supply of resources, development, diffusion of knowledge, particularly in the context of circular economy, still highly relevant, but then also formation, harmonization of markets, meaning alliances that commit to certain goals, but on the other hand, also direct regulatory impact. And we come to that on the next page. This is basically the embedding we saw in order to then really test, shape, and eventually also prove configurations or kind of key principles that allow for circular innovation to grow and to grow really bottom up. Now I'm going to do, apart from the customer suppliers, as I said, the regulatory bodies were the most relevant or third most relevant stakeholder for startups, and also regulatory intervention. So market formation and harmonization of strategic goals was the most important institutional element that the founders of these startups mentioned to us as relevant for their success. So not investors and other parties, but regulators really come into play here. And some of the findings, now particularly in this context of regulators, are heavily affecting waste-based circular startups. So the examples I showed you before, when I think of the poultry feathers, for example, that are used to really develop high-quality insulation material, but also bio-based materials that are used in vertical farms, insect farms to create protein for the feeding industry. These are all examples that face often regulatory challenge because they have to obtain licenses for waste material handling that basically supersede their kind of startup state, right? They are very costly, require a heavy administrative burden, while these startups just see an opportunity of creating some value out of resource flows that potentially on the other side would have actually created costs for incineration or any form of waste material handling. Taxation is another example where we heard complaints or had many barriers that were mentioned in the context of being, for example, when working in fashion, but using reused materials, or not even fashion materials, but other residual waste or residual resources, they are still taxed, you know, like the high-end fashion brands. So these are is also another example that I think or shows the kind of discrepancy of policy and CE innovation very well. What is the startup's way to deal with it is probably the one that one could guess. They accept also a certain level of ambiguity. So they basically sometimes are aware that they're not fully compliant with regulatory requirements in their municipalities, in their countries, whatever applies to them. but just follow their kind of entrepreneurial spirit by implementing and trying to bring down those barriers that the regulatory environment poses to them. Obviously, startups do not necessarily have the capabilities, the capacities to really work on lobbying and these activities. Wherefore, this might be something that should be taken off their shoulders. But on the other side, could be also very relevant for system builders to feed into policy making. One last example that I wanted to stress here is really this context of unrelated resource streams, as I mentioned before. Startups can also have the purpose of legitimizing policies, for example, on extended producer responsibility, because they showcase how best practices in circularity and holistic circularity can be implemented even with an underlying monetarily successful business model, which can avoid kind of this partly very political discussions about such schema when they are not very material or supply chain specific, which is currently the case in most cases. Equimodulation in EPR is something that I know is thought about more or less, I should say, but not yet fully fleshed out or implemented in the European Union. So yeah, just as a closing remark, as you see it also here, we want to really raise the relevance of circular startups in the political or policy context, because they really provide empirical evidence that can help to justify normativity, to justify directionality or strong directionality, which will be needed and is needed. We saw already the examples now from the European Commission, which really can be stronger supported by these real life cases, by structurally grasping the insight. And we have also seen that, for example, EPR is a good example. There can be platform-based business models, design-based business models, waste-based business models that all factor in EPR, so extended producer responsibility schema, but are technologically really unrelated. So the technological variety does not necessarily have to suffer when building on what circular startups do in this space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marvin, for this really interesting presentation. Finally, we have Maryna Henrysson. I give you the floor.
Sorry, I've got, yes, right. Apologies for the delay. My name is Maryna Henrysson, and I'm a researcher at KTH, which is based in Sweden, and I'll be talking about the importance of measurement and evaluation of circular economy performance. So it resonates with what previous speakers been talking about. And before going further into discussing what circularity performance is and how is it important to measure it and why, it's important to mention why policy monitoring and evaluation is important in policy cycle to begin with. And since policy cycle is somewhat a iterative process, the evaluation has a critical role to play in improving the quality, responsiveness, and accessibility of public services and of public policies as such. So policy evaluation and evidence-based understanding can help resolve those governance gaps and improve policy making as such. So it can help the policymakers to understand why and how policies are successful or not. So it supports strategic planning and setting priorities towards long-term objective. It enhances accountability and the legitimacy for the use of public resources and funds, allows to identify success factors and understand if the action that's been taken is sufficient. So it also promotes learning and capacity development. So different stakeholders can benefit from experience, for example, across EU. And it also raises awareness and stakeholders engagement among different stakeholders, including public, private, industrial, citizens, and consumers. So all in all, policy monitoring and evaluation is designed for enabling and facilitating action. So same goes for evaluating circularity performance in a way, because it's also quite a challenging area, as there's been mentioning before. Circular economy is about transitioning from linear model of economy. So we need to understand how is the economy performing at the moment, what is it baseline performance. So it's understanding the progress of the initiatives, and again, detecting what works and what doesn't, and as well as the state of advancement. So the evaluation of the result, which is expected to be done continuously and established periods of times, helps identify what can be improved in the future. And again, it improves the awareness in a way that creates a case for circular economy interventions. So it's, for example, value creation when we talk about private sector, and the raising or coherence with sustainable development ambition. And again, it allows us to understand the progress and outcome, how it fits, how the policy interventions fit progress and outcome. So all in all, it's designed and expected to trigger action. The issue with circularity and circular economy is that it is quite a comprehensive and systemic approach to change. So it requires a systemic perspective in setting boundaries, establishing baseline or business as usual scenarios, and then to respond to these kind of challenges, to ensure that the system's perspective is there, the indicators, metrics, or frameworks, or scoreboards, whatever we call them, that are expected to measure trends, to measure change, also has to measure it in systems level and on the level of systems ambition. So establishing baselines helps to set targets and priorities, including priorities for development of methodology. And methodologies have to be constantly revised and advanced, because current methodologies and current approaches to understanding sustainability or sustainable development performance have their advantages and limitations. And then in terms of, for example, circular economy, not only in EU, but also globally, among those countries that have been establishing policy priorities, for example, China, there is a very strong focus on waste management, and not in a sense of a broader perspective of resource management, for example, and not on closing the loops, which is circular economy model is about. So there is a need for broader understanding, a broader perspective on resource management, including the energy resources and not only the material input. Just to mention again that circular economy and its principles are not exactly very well defined. And even if European Union in its circular economy package emphasizes what circular economy is, there are different interpretations or the level of ambition in literature and in practice. So this table, for example, which was really hard to fit into one slide, shows what kind of principles exist in literature, but also in implementation and other suggestions from, for example, from the private sector. So to understand and create the approaches to measuring circular economy performance, we, or policymakers, mostly need to agree, understand, and establish what we measure and why we measure it, and what to focus on. So one of the ways that can be applied to implementation, and it is in a way commonly used in policy making. It is a goal-oriented evaluation and measurement. So for the circular economy performance, it's important to connect that interpretation of what circularity is and the goals that are established by policymakers. So we can think about different ways, and then this, for example, this suggestion is based on what European Union is prioritizing, and so the focus is broader than waste management or resource management. The focus is on reducing and improving environmental impact assessment, or well, reducing environmental pressure. And this type of indicators and this type of assessment frameworks, they collect indicators that have direct impact on ecosystem or natural environment, such as emissions and output, material process, and production and consumption. The indicators and metrics that include the governments focus on indicators that are related on such aspects as education, capacity building, and regulation as such. Those frameworks and indicators that include the economic and business and innovation aspects, they focus on those indicators that are expressed in monetary units and value added the circular economy to, for example, public investment and private investment in circular economy projects or innovation type of oriented projects. So those indicators can focus specifically on activities that are performed by within companies that are directed at consumers as well. And from the perspective of public policymakers as well, there's a need to upgrade public procurement practices, for example, or those measures that focus on managing material or energy demand. And these are also practices that related directly to the consumption practices and sustainability of consumption. And then the measures that are focused on infrastructure and technology, they include approaches that measure and cover indicators that aim to measure existence of tools and technologies and spaces that allow to boost and advance the circular economy. A very few amount of existing metrics and measures focus on socio-economic impacts, and there is a direct relation to policy priority and policy goals. For example, in EU, there is a strong focus on job creation. So we looked at existing frameworks and indicators that well exist globally. So this is just a few examples here. No need to look at the tiny text, but overall we found that there are around 440 circular economy related indicators and indices that focus on different levels. For example, on product level and value chain level, there are about 63 suggested indicators in literature. That there are 8 frameworks that are applied to evaluate circular economy performance on a national level, about 8 that focus on the regional level, and 17 frameworks and indicator or composite indicators suggested to evaluate circularity performance at the local or urban level. So all of the indicators that we've looked at are in the process of development, and the development of measurement frameworks overall is still in progress and faces some common obstacles and challenges that are observed in literature, but also reported by policymakers, for example, in the Nordic region. So those are the challenges that have to be addressed by the policymakers and the policy interventions for better measurement and evaluation of circularity performance, which is in itself is going to work towards implement in circular economy model at different levels. So we've grouped them a bit, and the challenges vary. For example, one of the commonly reported challenge is definition of circular economy itself, definition of what urban circular economy might be, and even the definitions of system boundaries or value chains and types of materials that can be included in the assessment. There is a lack of standards, while there is a variety of indicators that exist, but there is a lack of agreement on consolidation or harmonization of these indicators or standards. So there is a need for avoidance of application and replication that, for example, indicators basically measure the same thing, but they name it in a different way and use different metrics and methods to measure it. And then there is, so it makes it difficult to assess the robustness and reliability of the information that is provided in the monitoring and evaluation process. So the problem of incomplete information that creates obstacles and challenges for performing monitoring and evaluation. For example, as commonly reported, there are data gaps and inconsistency in statistical reporting, for example, across individual countries in EU. And it could be explained by the fact that dimensions of circular economy have not historically been reflected in statistical practices on a national or supranational level. So there is also, so that results in a way in a lack of integration of existing metrics, and also, for example, on the macro, meso, and micro level. And there is a need to link those indicators so it becomes clearly how it can be assessed across levels. And well, there is a strong focus in itself on waste, and in EU the focus is emerging on materials, but still, since the fundamentals of data-driven indicators, they are defined by biophysical characteristics, and the progress towards reporting soft characteristics of progress, for example, such as innovation or socioeconomic development, are undermined by this focus on biophysical characteristics of systems. And in itself, that the type of data that exists affects the type of indicators and monitoring systems that we establish, and defines the sectors that are prioritized for intervention. And it also reflects on the type of methodologies in itself that are available, for example, such as input-output assessments and LCA that's been mentioned before. So information itself that exists, not only the data, but also what is available for the policy makers, is asymmetric and incomplete. So it creates inconsistency in measurement and evaluation approaches, and issues such as, for example, rebound effect, what are we making circular, which system is being addressed, and does it create rebound effects in other systems, like, for example, we have observed with the legislation that was directed at energy efficiency in EU. So measures that are to be taken, they can at the initial stage can be focused on understanding the concept or how the circular economy or circularity is envisioned at different levels, as the concept itself is still being established and it is relatively contested. There's ongoing debate in academic, private, and public sector circles. So there is an action to provide this type of clarity that is needed for policy makers, and that will facilitate the establishment of goals and targets in policy, and will support development of monitoring and evaluation approaches. So it also goes back to establishment of standards, and so there is progress there as well. And for example, in European Union, has also been mentioned before, there is a broad range of different standards that reflect on those sectors or areas of interventions that are important for improved circularity, even though if they focus on individual products or sectors. Currently, ISO is developing a standard specifically for measuring circular economy and circularity performance, and it's about to be, well, it's expected to be ready this year. Private sector, non-profit suggest types of measurement and evaluation that can be used at different levels. And there is a variety of voluntary standards already, and there is, as been also mentioned before, EU Taxonomy Regulation. So if we think about specific or, well, individual monitoring framework in the context of the European Union, the Circular Economy Monitoring Framework is part of Circular Economy Action Package, and as it has been still in the process of development, it does reflect the policy priority, but also the availability of historical data and historical approaches to monitoring of, let's say, sustainability performance. So it has its own strengths and weaknesses. So for example, some of them are that it is quite concise. So it is not a very broad focus on indicators. So it allows for assessment and measurement, let's say, that can be quickly performed and is being performed already based on what we already know and what we already have. The information is available, and there are tools developed by Eurostat that are based on previous resource efficiency scoreboards and raw material scoreboards. So it can be simply interpreted by a variety of stakeholders, and so it is clearly communicated to the public and policymakers as well. It is yet to be more comprehensive and include the broader spectrum of environmental and economic social economic indicators, and it has not been applied widely yet. So there is no clarity on the availability of data at the urban and regional level, for example. And then so in that case, this aggregation of top-down data will be rather challenging. So this is a very brief introduction and interpretation of challenges that we have in monitoring and evaluation of policies.
Thank you, Maryna. Many thanks for your presentation. I think we could be here all afternoon talking about this, but we are really a little bit behind schedule. But I don't want to close this session without a further remark from you, and at least answer one of the questions, of the several questions that our audience put it. So I will make one of the questions that was to all the panelists from Yannick. And he says, while we use recycling, sharing and everything else is making the circular economy very important, do you think that this may distract from the fact that we are collectively consuming too much? There are signs that the material throw-up of modern society is simply too high. So should we not focus on limiting demand in the first place? So Paulo, maybe you can give us like 30 minutes, 30 seconds, 1 minute stop of your insights on this.
Thank you. As I said, the objective of product policy is precisely to go up in the waste hierarchy, and the first level of the hierarchy is prevention, precisely. One example is the Single-Use Plastic Directive, as I referred, that we banned certain products that we consider that they are useless and they can be substituted for more durable products. But the sustainable product policy is also promoting durability, and if you promote durability, you reduce the demand for new products and the demand for extraction of materials, transformation of materials, obviously. But we have to take one thing in consideration. We are consuming too much, I have no doubts, We, in some countries, are consuming too much, but in another country, people live with $1-2 per day. So these people are not consuming too much, and these people have the right to have more access to goods and services. So we have to level the demand for products, but in a sustainable but fair way also.
Taking on that, Maryna, I think you also worked with, well, not European countries. What is your take on this?
Well, again, yes, it's about equity and equality, as Paulo mentioned, but it's also it's a responsibility of manufacturers. So we cannot say that we can shift this responsibility only to consumers and ask them to limit their demand. It's about manufacturers and then policy support to manufacturing industry to reduce their demand for materials and reduce their demand for energy through, let's say, more sustainable design of products, but also increasing durability of products and also infrastructure. So there is this learning by doing, but there is also knowledge transfer and capacity development that are important, and that's where, for example, EU and EU policymakers can support the newly emerging economies and developing economies.
Thank you. Guilherme, in the regulation side, what do you think?
Well, regarding the regulation, in my opinion, also promotes that the reduce on consumption. For example, the Article 11 that I have presented, with the possibility of it. Okay, well, it extends the demand for batteries, but if the issues are cumulative, so if the batteries are more sustainable and the durability is increased, and also well, all together, I think that will be important, since the devices will have a more durable time, and the fact that if by changing a battery I don't have to change my mobile phone so many times, that will be important on that perspective. So but I think that also the regulation is also the focus is more in the part of the end of life management system, and the effect the circular economy in helping, because the materials that can be used in other perspectives will diminish the use of raw materials in the long time.
Yeah, Marvin, really quickly, and startups, are they aware of this? What is your take on your experience working with them?
So yeah, they are very much aware of this. As I indicated in my speech, they involve consumers heavily in their business models, and what we see a lot is consumer empowerment. So to the question, I wouldn't say that we consume too much, but we just don't consume smart enough. If that would be for me the better way to express it. Very concretely, when it comes to consumption, are examples of, for example, platform business models of startups that increase usage efficiency, and increase consumer empowerment, right? That you have transparency about the resources around you and access those in more efficient ways. I think this is what addresses this consumption in particular. The regulatory environment has to be built then, but I think the empowerment of the consumer to feel, I have now the resources to make this decision consciously and make the better decision consciously. This is what then circular economy tools based on tech have to enable, in my opinion.
Okay. Many thanks again. We are really on the end of our session. Again, I would like to thank all the speakers and the audience. I'm really sorry that we didn't have the time to address all of your questions. I just want to remark that the following session will start immediately, and it's a session on stakeholder engagement, which I really recommend. So again, many thanks for being here today. Stay safe, stay tuned, and have a nice week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Minna, you can have the floor.
There we are. Nice to see you all. So as Anna said, our session will now start. We have 50 minutes, And I'm Minna Lammi. I come from University of Helsinki. My area is consumption and circular economy, and I'm also very interested in participatory methods. Hence, this session where we are looking especially consumption and circular economy and stakeholder engagement is really, really interesting. We have 3 presentations today, and we will start with a very interesting topic about Ikea and its plans to transform itself into circular economy and sustainability. So welcome, Anna Barbosa.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
So shall I go ahead and start the panel?
Please do, but please.
Or would you like to introduce the other panelists first?
No, you can start, but I will just want to say that you're free to ask in the chat, so I will follow that. So welcome.
Okay, so firstly, I need to say good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining this conference, and I would like to start by thanking the opportunity to be here on behalf of Ikea. It is a privilege to be addressing consumer, consumption, sustainability topics together. And I am here to talk about sustainability and circularity at Ikea. So I will touch a little bit generally on sustainability and try to go more in detail in some examples how we tackle circularity. But I would like to start by saying that sustainability is actually fully integrated in our business as we see it today. It is embedded in all processes and in all functions. But it is not new. Sustainability historically is part of Ikea's DNA. Some examples like the famous flat packs that we are known for, where we try to transport more in a truck or a container, therefore saving costs but also CO2 emissions. Our code of conduct towards our suppliers, which we have ongoing for over 20 years, or even our investments in sustainability, not the least in renewable energy in the past decade. But not being new, this concern with resources, at some point we felt a need to structure our approach to sustainability. So in 2012, we have created our first sustainability strategy, our People and Planet Positive strategy. This strategy was then revised in 2018. It is still People and Planet Positive. It is the strategy that we work with today, and it sets our ambition up to 2030 and frames our actions in order to reach those ambitions. We are right now in a decisive decade towards 2030. We are fully committed with Paris Agreement and halting global warming below 1.5 degrees. So we are internally and externally giving high focus, accelerating initiatives in the area of sustainability, so that actually we can meet this agenda. Coming back to the strategy, it is a global strategy for the whole group, covering all our value chain, as you will see, and it is structured in 3 chapters, what we call 3 change drivers. I don't have the chance now to go deeply in the 3 chapters, of course, but I will touch each one of them. I would like to just briefly mention the first chapter, Healthy and Sustainable Living, focused in our core business, our knowledge for life at home, and our offer towards our customers. The second chapter, Circular and Climate Positive. It's focused in our operations throughout the value chain, from raw material and production, transport and retail, where I sit, for example. And finally, the last chapter, fair and equal, focus on all the people that we touch with our operations. So now going a little bit deeper in each one of these chapters, starting with change driver, healthy and sustainable living. We have the ambition by 2030 to inspire and enable more than 1 billion people to live a better life within the limits of the planet. And to do this, we need to integrate sustainability and circularity in our business, in our commercial offer. We need to show, to present products and solutions to our customers that are sustainable. In Portugal, specifically, where wallet is so thin, we need to democratize sustainability. We need to connect sustainability and affordability by showing that our products and sustainable solutions are not more expensive, and actually by showing that products and sustainable solutions can bring savings to families in their monthly budget. Circular services are a great way to reach these ambitions because they touch both saving of resources, but also financial savings. A little bit more details on our second change driver, circular and climate positive. We have the ambition by 2030 to become climate positive and to regenerate resources while continuing to grow our business. This means that we will use only renewable or recycled materials in all our products. And it means also that we will decrease more emissions than we generate with our value chain. How do we do this? We do this by integrating circular design in our products, designing with renewable and recycled raw materials, as I mentioned, but also designing so that the products can be recyclable. Before that, designing so that the products can last longer, can be multifunction and have many lives in different homes, for example. We also do this by continuing to reduce the waste in our operations and recycling and upcycling that waste. And then in another aspect, we also continue to focus in being more efficient in our operations when it comes to energy and water consumption. As I said, being more efficient and also to increasing the use of renewable electricity. Mobility is also a part of this change driver, being mobility of our last mile services, mobility of our co-workers, or mobility of our customers. Then moving on to change driver 3, fair and equal, we have the ambition by 2030 to create positive social impact for everyone across the value chain. And here we start with our co-workers, but we move towards the co-workers in our supply chain and also the communities where we operate. We do this by having a strong agenda for equality, diversity and inclusion in Ikea as a workplace, namely by supporting inclusion from vulnerable communities in our workplace, but also by supporting local, national, global NGOs, causes, authorities through our community engagement projects, through our good cause projects, and through engagement as spokesperson. We also support social entrepreneur companies, and this way we aim to have to be a positive agent for change in our communities. This was a brief presentation of the strategy. I will now move into the circularity theme. And I can add that we actually work in circularity touching the three change drivers that I've just mentioned. But I will bring you two examples. One is how we work with recycled materials, and this is more connected with circular and climate positive. And I will then talk about how we work, or bring you an example of how we work with services to prolong product life, and that is more connected with healthy and sustainable living. So starting with the renewable and recycled raw materials, I remind you our ambition that by 2030, all our raw materials will be either renewable or recycled. Today, 60% of our product range is produced from renewable raw materials, such as wood or cotton, and 10% of our product range contains recycled material, such as recycled PET in many of our plastic products, and also polyester, mainly in rugs. A concrete example of how we do this are the kitchen fronts that you are seeing here in this picture. The black one is our first kitchen front with this technology, Kungsbacka, and the green one is our new Bodarp. But the technology is the same. This was an innovation development together with our designers, product developers, suppliers, sub-suppliers also to secure the raw materials. The kitchen front is produced from recycled wood. The board material is made from recycled wood. And then the covering is made from recycled PET bottles, which gives this beautiful finishing, either black or green. So we have now extended the technology to more models and more designs. And then I would like to touch on circular services. This is an area where we are exploring and accelerating with initiatives such as furniture as a service, where you have the possibility to rent rather than own, as it was also mentioned here today already, or also spare parts service to prolong product life in case of loss or damage of some fittings or parts. But we also have our second life service, which is the one that I will explore a little bit more. This is a more mature service. It is present in most markets, and it allows our customers to sell back to us their used Ikea furniture, which in turn we will resell in our as-is area, giving them a new life in a new home. We have had last November, during the Black Friday weekend, a campaign to promote this service. The service is always available as long as the stores are open, but it was promoted in a campaign. It was our Buyback Friday campaign. We chose this moment, the Black Friday weekend, to inspire reflection around how to make each product that we have at home last longer for us or in another life. This campaign was a success, namely in Portugal, with great media and customer interest. In Portugal alone, we received from our customers over 4,400 products. They were returned to us for a second life, and these results made Portugal one of the globally most successful in this campaign. And it is an example of the different initiatives we are having when it comes to prolonging product life, but it's also a strong indication of the customer interest and need in this second-hand market, both for environmental but also for economical reasons. So the two topics I wanted to bring, using renewable and recycled materials, and services to prolong product life. I have briefly presented them to you. I hope it was inspiring, as actually it is for me to work with these topics every day. I thank you, and I am available for your questions afterwards. Thank you so much.
Tack ska du ha. Thank you. I do speak Swedish as well, obviously. So that's fun. I have a question. Obviously, annoyingly, I don't come from Sweden, but I come from Finland, so we always envy Ikea. How did Swedes come up with all these things. I think IKEA was known for affordability, at least when it started, and that was in the core of the business. So I'm interested to know, has there been really a big shift in the business model, and has it changed the way you product the furnitures as well?
Well, it is true, and I can start by our vision to create a better everyday life for the many people. IKEA is for the many, and that means for the ones with thin wallets. So affordability was and is still a priority for us. We start the design of each of our product by the price tag. However, there are other aspects that we include in this design. And I will briefly mention quality, form, yes, function, and sustainability. So actually today we can talk about design with these 5 dimensions, and meaning that we can have beautiful, qualitative, and consciously produced products at affordable prices. So it's designed for all. That's why we call it democratic design. That's where the concept comes from. Having said that, and this democratic design is not a new concept, having said that, what we have seen in the last years from when we set our strategy, but also the feedback we receive from our customers, sustainability is becoming more and more relevant, is becoming a concern, it's becoming a need. Our customers tell us that they are concerned, they tell us they want to do something, but they tell us that they don't exactly know what to do. It was also covered in the in some of the lectures before. They are unsure what is the information about this product. And they also tell us, and I cannot afford to pay more. So it means that we now see an opportunity and a business opportunity, and at the same time being a global company, a responsibility to bring sustainability and affordability together. And this is a strategy that we have actually in Portugal, we have launched for at least 2 years, and in Inca Group, we are strengthening since at least 1 year ago, going hand in hand. We see that these 2 areas, they complement each other. They will allow our business to grow for the future, and they will answer the needs from our customers.
Thank you. I have one more question, but we need to be very short.
Fast. Okay. I will try.
Nice question. How can the Second Life service contribute for the business growing in IKEA?
We are still, this business model is relatively new, but what we see is that the fact this business is, or this service is creating trust in one hand, is solving a need for the customers that perhaps don't need a table anymore, but is giving customers with lesser means the opportunity to buy in our, as I said, in our as-is, to buy a product that is in good conditions at a lower price. So it, in fact, it is answering the needs of different 2 kinds of customer at least, and this is the business opportunity.
Okay, thank you so much, Anna. I'm sorry we have to. I would
thank you.
But we need to go to the second next presentation. It's Rita Lopez. She's from Center for Environmental and Sustainability Research from Portugal, and is going to talk about collaborative processes and circular economy. Please, Rita.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to know if you are seeing my presentation. Yeah, the full presentation, or yeah, okay, so thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts and research with you. I'm a researcher at CENSE, the Center for Environmental and Sustainability Research, and I have been working on participatory and collaborative process, mainly on circular economy, low carbon economies, and ecosystem services and bioeconomy. So today I'm going to share with you the role of collaborative process in defining circular economy pathways based on the experience of projects that I've been involved in. So I would like to start my presentation by sharing with you these three main principles of circular economy. So design out of waste, keep products and materials in use, and regenerate natural systems. So the last one being less known and less talked about as a principle of circular economy. But the challenge here is how can we define these pathways towards circular economy, having the three principles and the articulation of them in mind and in action. So is this a new concept, circular economy? I would say that as a concept and what it integrates is not new. We already know about the meaning of sustainability, of less pollution, better consumption. So it's not new in terms of what it means, but it's very new in terms of what is the process and the big goal of circular economy. So we need to look at it as a new perspective, but it requires a new perspective. And it means that we need to a systemic approach and cooperation among actors operating in the supply chain, from the producers to the final consumers. So we need everyone on board to look for this new perspective, new paradigm that brings the need to look to the entire value chain and also the integration and articulation between and among different value chains. So having said that, I would like to share with you a project that we developed in CENSE for the Sociedade Ponte Verde, which is the entity that manages the recycle flows in Portugal. We were asked to think about the potential of circular economy in Portugal in specific sectors and to understand how to conduct this assessment, this study. We define a process for co-creating a vision and a roadmap for circular economy in the food and beverage packaging sector. So why this sector specifically? Because it is integrated in the fast consumer goods with a lot of consumed goods. There is a very growing importance of packaging in supporting circular transitions, linked to, for example, the e-commerce and the need for helping solving problems associated with food waste. And also the impacts of food waste are very important for these kind of problems. The food waste in terms of the consumer part, mainly linked to high-income countries, but also in the stage of the production, which is more linked with low-income countries. So there was here a very big opportunity to understand how we could address this, and also because there's a sector known by valuing by products currently, and with opportunities also to increase this vision. So what we did was to develop this collaborative process, mainly based on three major stages: the scoping stage, where we explore different sectors, synergies. We conducted exploratory interviews with stakeholders from all the value chain, and a second stage informed by the results of the first one, when we co-create with stakeholders a long-term vision towards 2035. And we finished this looking how to achieve this vision with a roadmap for action for this sector. So I do not have time to go into detail within the results, but I would like to share some interesting remarks that we came up with this study. So when we asked stakeholders about the already existence of synergies and industrial symbiosis, we came up with this answer that 56% of the interviewed stakeholders acknowledge that there is already synergies being at place. But an interesting and surprising result was that 25% of the answers showed that they are their perceptions are that these synergies, these industrial symbioses, are impossible to achieve, which is very important if we want to continue and pave the way towards circular economy. So, and besides this important result of 56%, if we look within these answers, 55% are within the same sector and only 18% among different sectors, which means that the synergies that we already have are very within the same sector and within the same actor. So we really need to broaden our views, broaden our actions towards integration, the integration of more stakeholders and sectors and so on. Another interesting remark was when we wanted to understand where to act in the value chain, where we need to start in terms of implementing circular strategies, the answers showed that there is a common understanding that we need to tackle all the entire value chain. Otherwise, we are not going to achieve the good results. But the consumption, the consumers emerge as a very important one. So we need to pay attention that if we stay very restricted in the consumption side, we'll miss the other part, and we cannot only put all the effort on one part of the value chain, on the consumer side. Another interesting lesson that I would like to share was the fact that there are already good initiatives, circular strategies taking place. There are efforts being conducted, for example, in trying to reduce the weight of the bottle packaging, for example. But it was highlighted the need that we need to have all the value chains parts being involved in this evolution. Otherwise, we will miss the gains that we achieved. For example, if we do not have the distribution, transportation in the same line, probably we will lose these packages that are more light, less resistant. So we need here sectors being working side by side on this way. So after this first scoping stage, we gather participants from all the value chain, including public administration, research, business, civil society, and covering all from the production to the waste management flows areas. And we ask them to co-create a vision for the future, identify the opportunities and the challenges that were associated to this vision, and then generate concrete ideas and actions to really achieve that vision. And we came up with this very ambitious vision that I'm not expecting that you all read it, but just to show you that this is a very ambitious vision. for 2035, and covers all the value chain for packaging of food and beverage production. Based on this vision, we were able to define this roadmap for action with concrete actions, mainly divide between research and innovation, new business models, eco-design, marketing and communication, and regulation and incentives. So this roadmap for action is a result of a collaborative process and the research, desktop research also from our team. So it really reflects the sector and the perceptions of who the agents of this sector. So as the main perceptions on the process that we had conducted, what was really interesting to see is that from the point of view of who were participating and collaborating in this co-creation process, they thought the process was very relaxed moment that allowed the intervention of all participants. So a space to share and to have a collective reflection. That is something that we are missing in our times with all these virtual.
Rita, can you wrap up, please?
Yes, of course. Sharing experience, having a high perception of different perspectives, which is very interesting to understand the opinion of the other participants. So very quickly, I would also like to share with you a completely different project that we also were involved to, the Portuguese carbon neutrality roadmap towards 2050, which had a completely different goals. So defining a roadmap for Portugal to be neutral in carbon in 2050. This was a huge project that involved different teams, modeling, energy, and very different, diverse sectors, from mobility to waste energy and so on. And what I would like to share with you is that we had this big collaborative process towards the integration of circular economy on this roadmap. So we conducted 7 sectorial visioning workshops aiming to capture the vision of the different sectors in terms of circular variables and how they envision the circularity within these sectors in 2050 in a country that is neutral in carbon. So at the end, we were able to collect and inform this roadmap that it was built upon a very complex methodology based on modeling, but we were able to incorporate these circular economy variables on the main results in the different sectors, how it can be integrated in terms of circularity. And this is only possible because we involved and engaged a different kind of stakeholders in all the process. So to wrap up, lessons learned from my experience, our experience at CENSE in developing this process. The engaged stakeholders have the will to continue collaborating. This is something that we felt in the process. A process of this nature allows the co-creation of a shared vision and the definition of a pathway to achieve it also. It's important engaging all stakeholders across the value chain in structured discussions that allowed us to define a vision, a concrete vision and a roadmap for action. Collaborative process may support how to reflect the impact of circular economy in carbon neutrality as also. And since circular economy is a disruptive model that needs structural changes in society and in people's mental models, we really need to have everyone on board and to think and co-create together to define circular economy pathways. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Rita. I won't take questions to this spot, but I will let Salomé Areias carry on, and then if we have time, we will take questions for you and for Salomé. Please, Salomé. You need to unmute yourself. I can see your slide.
Hello.
There we are. Excellent. Can you we can see still the side of your slides as well. Can you put the presentation mode?
Is it okay?
Yes. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, great. So, hello everyone. My name is Salomé. My background is in fashion consumption. Thank you so much for having me, and a special acknowledgement to my awesome supervisors that supported me in this study, which represents the very first part of my PhD research we are working on. I am here to talk about the role of connectedness in responsible consumption of fashionable commodities. So you might be thinking what connectedness is all about, right? And connectedness is the extent to which individuals include nature within the cognitive representation of the self. So it means that it is actually a cognitive notion humans have of how we perceive ourselves as part of nature as a whole. So you see, we were trying to find other ways rather than forceful policies to change consumption patterns, and especially regarding the consumption of fashionables, which have really strong links to addiction and impulsive buying. And we're all wearing clothes today, right? Well, at least I suppose we are. And we all need clothes, but we are very far from a balance between what we need, what we take, and nature's capacity to regenerate. So for the last 15 years, as you can see here, we have been using clothes less and less, but the sales of clothing have grown faster and faster, faster than the world GDP, faster than the world population, and we are now producing over 100 billion garments per year, which represents really a heavy toll on the environment and on overall people that make our clothes. And many researchers say that the growth is crucial to accomplish the Paris Agreement goals, for instance, but the Circular Economy Action Plan doesn't refer to the growth in clothing production. Instead, it hopes to scale up the circular economy and decouple economic growth from resource use. Well, this perspective has raised questions among researchers that say that if we focus on efficiency only, we will face a rebound effect, which means that prices will go down and definitely consumption will go up again. So, green narrative under a growth-based economy encourages basically any brand to make environmental claims for the sake of sales, right? So greenwashing is not only prone to happen, but even the European Union directive against it is non-legally binding. So, and I'm very glad to see today a lot of proposals towards the legislation of greenwashing, but it is actually allowed. And studies have shown that 4 out of 5 consumers do not believe in fashion environmental claims, but do not recognize greenwashing either. And given also the lack of accountability of fashion brands over the environmental impact and the extreme poverty in production countries, all these plans towards efficiency without the growing need to be supported by a profound inner transformation in ourselves, in every citizen, right? And because there have been studies that say that mindful choices in consumption can be driven by connected states of higher awareness, we decided to study connectedness. Okay, so the main goal of this study
was to present a state-of-the-art for the first links between connectedness and responsible consumption, and eventually of fashionables. So first of all, we have to outline the context of the study, right? So we started by reviewing reports by international organizations like Ellen MacArthur, the European Commission, Global Fashion Agenda, and so on. And we also crossed numbers with some fashion brand reports. As the methodology for the findings we are presenting today, we then developed a semi-systematic keyword search by combining terms like connectedness, oneness, interconnectedness, and so on, mindfulness, psychoanalysis, and eco-psychology as drivers of connectedness, consumption, consumer, buying, awareness, responsible, sustainable, and so on. We got a lot of publications, and later, as we underwent the investigation, we narrowed this number down to the most relevant 26 publications. Okay, so one of the things that we realize is that connectedness has so many meanings among the scientific community, because connectedness can actually go from simply being physically in nature or extracting resources from nature to a whole philosophical or spiritual worldview. We had to determine our research path, right? We had to decide, and that research path was the deeper one on your left, from cognitive to philosophical, which is also where we can find mindfulness principles and oneness beliefs. So what is really interesting noticing here is that among all the different terminology related to being at one with nature, so connectedness, human nature connection, interconnectedness, oneness, they all relate positively to ethical behavior in a very consistent way. There were a lot of consensual findings here. And regarding links to ethical consumption, they were all coming from connectedness to nature. I was really struck by this because other variable that we found to be positively related was mindfulness, which seems very closely related to many other states of awareness towards others, such as activism, altruism, self-transcendence, and also while being negatively related to depression and anxiety. And because consumers' decision-making is mostly unconscious and emotional, we traced links with emotions too. And we found that guilt and pride links to responsible consumption were somewhat different. Although guilt has strong links with responsible consumption, because they are driven by moral norms, if the guilt happens to be persecutory, it might backfire into a need for punishment and thus to the opposite effect, to the opposite behavior, like, for instance, impulsive buying or simply denial of climate change. So what did we find? Positive links between connectedness and responsible consumption, positive links with mindfulness that in turn has links to consumer awareness. We found that feeling guilt might drive responsible consumption, but not at all times. And overall, it seems there is some potential in connectedness to drive behavior towards the 12th Sustainable Development Goal. But we definitely need to find more publications specifically on fashionables. And given that most consumers are unaware of their behavior, we think we should take this into account in surveys as well. note that a lot of these studies that we have found were based on participants self-reporting their own behavior. So next time we should have this in mind in literature review. And also we will have to have a clear-cut judgment going through studies that oversimplify sustainability as a binary. Because as we have seen today, since early this morning, labeling something as ethical is really quite complex. We really hope to be telling you more about this study very soon. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Salomé. Do we have questions from the audience, please?
There was one question in the chat for Ikea, which I have taken.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I was wondering, Salomé, or perhaps all the panelists, about this guilt. I mean, is it good that is something negative that is behind the consumer behavior towards sustainability, or should we concentrate something more positive? Do you think guilt works?
Okay, I'm going to answer first. Well, actually, I think as we have seen in all these studies, guilt actually works, but it really can backfire, as I said. So I would say it is something where brands would have to take this into serious account and use it very wisely. I personally believe that we should really study and find other ways for sustainable consumption that should be more through self-governance, not just more selfless than self-centered. So, because we have seen then not just about guilt, but also about pride, that it really can backfire into really hazardous type of behavior. So I would say that.
Thank you.
I would like to add from
Yes.
a point of view that we have a positive take on this decade coming up to 2030. We believe we are still in time to act, both governments, global companies, but also individuals. But we believe in a positive approach that, in one hand, that each small change can have an impact, because if many personal or individual small initiatives, they can add up and accumulate. So we do have this positive approach and communication, but at the same time, we believe that the message cannot be complex for the receiver. The receiver needs simple solutions that have meaning in their daily life and that can solve the issues in life at home that they have, which today are growing because we are more and more living at home. So presenting a tip, how can I make my food last longer in the fridge? Or is it better to wash my dishes by hand or in the washing machine? This has been our approach. Simple, positive, and with small steps.
Thank you, Anna. I have one question for Rita and Salomé, but I think we are running out of time. So perhaps could you? Yes, I can see that we could perhaps answer them online. So thank you so much about interesting questions and interesting presentations. And we'll let the next panel come in.
Thank you all. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. If Rita and Salomé are still here, can you answer to these questions in question and answer? Sorry, Rita.
Yes.
I knew there
Okay.
was a break. I could have let you answer those, but
I'm still here.
Yeah.
So right now,
I can add.
answer.
I can add something on the question raised by the audience. One very interesting thing about this co-creation process is that you have social learning. So getting people together in this co-creation process, we have an evolution from our individual mental models, and we learn from each other. So I would say that having this all the stakeholders together towards a vision that should be a desirable future would bring and integrate all the other parts of interconnectedness and the link with nature, because they will learn from each other and they will co-create the pathway towards the main goal. So I would like to add this. Thank you.
Thank you. And Salomé, there was a question about.
Yeah, I was just reading Rita's question. Thank you so much, Rita, for that question. Rita says the sustainable choices for clothing are still more expensive. Oh, okay. I'm not reading it anymore. No problem. I think I remember. So Rita was asking if we could make it affordable to because sustainable fashion is not sustainable yet, and can we make it affordable, for recycled materials and all? And I would say that if we make that affordable, just like I said at the beginning of my presentation, if we make it it depends what is affordable, because we have, for the last decade, we have really changed our perception in culture around the democratization of fashion. And nowadays, one shirt costs about the same as a sandwich, and that is just like morally wrong. So affordable, of course, it has to be affordable because it has to be for everyone, but we really have to tackle this perception over the value, over how we value things. So specifically, how we are addressing decoupling the economic growth from the resource use, we really need to do this very wisely. Otherwise, we will really drop prices down and the consumption will keep going up. So I would say the trick is to get more durability, and also to have strong education plans towards valuing not just clothes, everything around us, and valuing everything what we use and connect to everything what we use. So answering to your question, Rita, yes, I believe everyone is working towards affordability, but that's not the only thing we need to think about. It's not just about GDP. We need to think about wellness and well-being for all, and feeling happy with what we use. Thank you.
Thank you, Salomé. I think now we need to stop really, but thanks for the answers.
Okay, I think we can start. So good evening, everyone from Brussels, and welcome to this last session on the Stand of the Consumer Conference that will focus on product regulation and producer responsibility in a circular economy. My name is Vasilos Rizos. I'm head of Sustainable Resources and Circular Economy at the Center for European Policy Studies, and I will be the moderator of this discussion. So for a start, just to give a little bit of a context, I don't think there is really a need to emphasize that the way products are designed, they're produced, consumed, and managed at the end of their lifetime determines really to a large extent their overall environmental impact. And at the European policy level, there are already various initiatives, policy actions to address sustainability aspects of products. And as you probably know, product policy is really a key component of the Circular Economy Action Plan. The last version of the plan was published in March 2020. Now, currently, there are already various ongoing legislative initiatives in the field of product policy, and I think this is really a very good timing to try to discuss in more detail some of these issues, including, for example, what are the key challenges at the moment for product policy, what are the key gaps in the existing policy mix, how can we address specific elements, specific topics that they receive attention, for example, product adolescence, and also how can we incentivize consumers to be more widely engaged in circularity practices. Now, in order to dive into these issues, our colleagues from the Nova Consumer Lab have brought together a very great panel, I would say, of experts with strong academic credential and knowledge on these issues. So we will start in the beginning with Karl Dalfmar, who is Associate Professor at Lund University. Karl is a leader of various research programs and policy projects, and in his research he covers various pieces of environmental law. Some of them are also relevant to today's discussion, for example, the Eco-Design Directive, plant obsolescence, and eco-labeling schemes. Then we will move with Anne-Lise, who is Professor of European Law at the Université Catholique de Louvain, and she's also a guest professor at KU Leuven University, where she teaches law and behavioral sciences. Her interdisciplinary research covers topics such as law and economics, law and psychology, law and happiness, and empirical analysis of law. Then we will conclude this round of panelist contribution with Emilia Miscenik, who is an associate professor at the University of Rijeka. Among other things, she has authored a book on consumer credit agreements and the first Croatian handbook on European private law. And she's also the co-chair of the Croatian Hub of the European Institute. So we will have 3 speakers in a row, and just a few words regarding the structure. We will first start with 10-minute contributions by all panelists, and then hopefully there will be some time for discussion where we would like to take some questions from you as well. So I guess by now you're all familiar with the Q&A function of the Zoom, so please use this function to send us your questions throughout the webinar, and we will try to take as many as possible towards the end of the event. Now, with no further delay, I would like to first give the floor to Karl Dalfmar. Karl, first of all, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. I would say that product policy and circular economy policy discussions are by no means new to you. So what are your views on the current policy developments? How do you see the developments? And also, how do you think we can improve the existing policy mix?
Thank you very much. Do you hear me and see my screen?
All perfect.
Great, thanks. Yes, a lot of questions for 10 minutes. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. The weather is turning for the worse here in Sweden, so I wish I was in Portugal, but I'm sure the discussions will keep me warm. All right, I do quite a lot of research on circular economy policy and quite a lot in relation to companies. What are the barriers for circular business models? Right now we're looking into repairability and could we harvest the spare parts from end-of-life product flows and stuff like that. So first of all, when we talk about policies for the circular economy, there are so many. So this is just from the first circular economy action plan. Now we have the second plan, we have a lot of national policies. So loads of policies and laws, so we cannot talk about all of them today. I thought what I would say is say a few words on some major challenges I see for product policy and generally maybe circular economy policy going forward. Talk a little bit about policies and laws for incentivizing longer product lifetimes and various Rs, repair, remanufacturing, and so on. Provide some examples related to current policy developments and maybe say a few words about the need for a policy mix going forward. And this in 10 minutes, so it will be challenging. But first of all, as I think most of you know, if we talk about the climate challenge, a lot of policymakers still see a future where we still have the street up here with the same cars, it's just that they're electric. However, when researchers crunch the number, they see that no matter what kind of technology we use in electric motors, it's hard to see how we're going to have all the resources for this, especially if we don't want to resort to very dirty mining practices. So you cannot, and that goes for a lot of other technologies, you cannot really have a climate solution without a circular economy and resources taken into the equation. However, when we look at the circular economy policies, we also see that a lot of needs to pay attention to other stuff. We talk about recycling most of our plastics, but the great majority of plastics, packaging and so on are low quality, poor stuff that no one wants, so there's no market for them. We also know that a lot of used products and packaging contain dangerous chemicals such as flame retardants, so you cannot recycle them, for instance. So you cannot look at the circular economy and resource challenge without looking at the chemicals challenge. And this is why we see all these things currently being more and more integrated in Brussels. Another challenge is, of course, the circular business models. We all know that whether there are different types of business models, but we all know that they have a challenge to compete in a linear economy, and that current consumer habits regulations are linear, and we are geared into linear thinking. And we should also here acknowledge that trying to increase wood-based construction in Sweden is not the same as increasing repairs or remanufacturing of certain products. Like, so many sectors will need different, partly different policies. Some of them are the same, some different. Biggest challenge, which has already been touched upon here today, is the consumer challenge. It used to be easy, right? You were a green consumer if you thought carefully about what you bought and used eco-labels and so on. But now we foresee more roles for consumers. Apart from being prosumers and putting solar PVs on your roof, you could also repair your product or maintain your product, or you can be a sharer and take part in the sharing economy. And the problem are manifold here. One is, of course, that the consumers will be confused. But more importantly, from a policy perspective, we need to reduce our consumption levels, and therefore just as there's a waste management hierarchy, there's also a hierarchy here. We need to steer more towards the more sustainable behavior. We are a little bit trying to promote everything at once, but we need to steer harder. Now, topic for today, product lifetime. One key challenge in the circular economy is to have products that live longer, so we save the resources. And this can be a bit simplified, be done in two ways. You have a more durable design of products and components, or you promote the various R's, more repair, more use, more remanufacturing, and so on, to prolong the lifetime of products and components. And therefore we see a new generation.
Sometimes, Carl, we are losing your sound. Your microphone goes out very fast, but you know, I don't know if this is something you can fix. Just keep it.
I'll try and sit more still, maybe. I don't think I brought the headset. Is it okay now?
We actually lost it for a few seconds. Maybe if you sit a little bit closer to the microphone. Well, if this can be fixed, it might be a technical issue beyond your control. Yeah. Okay.
I'll try and sit and speak slowly. We'll see. It's typical because Zoom hasn't jammed in a long time, but you never know. So what we see now is a new generation of policies that really are triggering product lifetimes in various ways. You have European policies, the Eco Design Directive, some requirements on durability, a lot of new requirements on repairability, provision of spare parts, etc. We will probably see some kind of labeling scheme for durability. We have a lot of new standards coming up that provides the underpin potential standards for regulating durability and repairability of products. National policies are interesting because nations, especially around Europe, are using very different legal frameworks to address product lifetimes. They can be tax law, criminal law, consumer law, and so on. Then we have quite a lot of interesting regional and local initiatives, such as Repair Network Vienna, public procurement of remanufactured furniture, stuff like that. So what we have is an experimentation, a lot of new policies coming up, more policies proposed. Some main concerns, I'll just mention a few here. Eco Design Directive, one challenge I see coming up now is that there are more requirements related to repairability than durability. And that is, I think, the wrong priority. When you buy a product, you don't want to hear that it's repairable, you want to hear it's durable. And I think, generally speaking, even if it's easier to regulate the repairability, the key thing is durability. There are also many concerns among many actors that producers will find a way around these requirements and that sanctions will not be deterrent enough. Repair policies are often ad hoc. There's no master plan behind it. There's also a need to address for repair and remanufacturing intellectual property rights. Often companies use patents, copyrights, and so on to stop desired practices, generally speaking. One thing to take up in extended producer responsibility, there's a lot of discussions on modulated fees and other kinds of rules here to use in producer responsibility, but we should remember the key thing, the key problem. There's still only requirements for recycling collection. And in the current schemes, there is some products that could be reused, there's some spare parts that could be salvaged, but that doesn't happen easily when there's no incentives to reuse. And producers and others don't want to pay for two logistical flows for these products. So we can't get away from the fact that we may need to consider whether there should only be recycling targets or whether we need to enforce investment into more flows here. These were just some concerns, but I think we need to take a step back and say, what are the main barriers for long lifetime and repairs? What are some of the additional barriers? We need to really think of the policy frameworks, which are the main policies to address this, what could be some supporting policies to address this. We need a policy mix, and we can't get away from the fact that the most important policies are taken at the EU level. They will provide the most important rules of the game for the market and so on. In some cases, we need national policy, tax law, infrastructure, etc. are mainly national policies, but we also need national policies to lead the way and provide some inspiration and dynamics. I think I almost made it in 10 minutes. I hope the sound was okay. So thank you.
Thank you, Carl. You're definitely within your time limit, so thank you very much for it. Thanks for giving this overview of challenges, of barriers, which I'm sure they will spare some questions. I mean, they definitely spared some questions for me as well. Before we move ahead, just to remind everyone that you can use the Q&A box already to start sending your questions. I was informed by one of the speakers that her Q&A function doesn't work. I don't know if this is something we can get technical support, or if it works for the other participants. I hope it works for me at least. I hope there's no issue. So with no further delay, I would like to turn to Anne-Lise. So Anne-Lise, first of all, thank you for being with us today, for taking the time. Product obsolescence really comes up very often in the discussions on product policy. So I'm sure you have some things to say on this topic based on your research, your ongoing research. So the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Vasilios. Just sharing my screen. Can you see the slides all right?
Yes.
Okay, all good. So this is a paper, I'm presenting a paper called Confronting Product Obsolescence, which I co-authored with Samuel Becher, who is on a different time zone, but says hello from New Zealand. And in 10 minutes, I can only give you an overview of a rather lengthy paper. So I'll just refer to it for more detail.
Yeah, Anne-Lise, I was informed here by the organizer that maybe the slides are in presenter's view. I don't know if you can put them full screen somehow.
Okay, so that's, yeah, I was wondering about that. I think I need to, hang on, share my other screen.
Okay.
Is this better?
Yes, I think it's full screen.
Okay, apologies. The first to speak about planned obsolescence was Bernard London in a 1932 essay where he was proposing that government regulate product durability and limit it so that consumers would replace goods more often and thereby boosting growth. Now, obviously, the perspective has changed, and as the commissioner said this morning, the current thinking is that product obsolescence is a problem, not a solution. So what we do in the paper is we start by offering a typology of product obsolescence, because we needed this to discuss the current policy framework, to map what the law looks at and what it doesn't look at. Then we ask whether product obsolescence is a problem. This is not purely a rhetorical question. The structure of the paper is that of a law and economics paper. We look at whether how to conceptualize consumer harm and whether the market failures can be remedied by other ways than regulation. I'll mostly skip this part for the presentation so that I can focus on how product obsolescence is addressed currently and how the current legal framework can be helpful. So starting with the typology, the first category is planned obsolescence. So this one is intentional. It's, for instance, when your printer says it's done printing, even though it's still perfectly functional. So this clearly calls for regulation, and Carl just mentioned the bans in some countries. Second category is functional obsolescence. Now, it's close but distinct. It's when a good breaks down due to a weak part, and that part cannot easily be changed or at a cost that's too high, or sometimes they cannot be repaired at all. And clearly, that calls for policy attention to. Technological obsolescence is a consequence of technological progress. There comes a time when a device is just more functional than a previous device, and this does not call for policy attention. The idea is not to stifle innovation. Postponement obsolescence is linked to what is sometimes known as versioning, when a manufacturer releases several versions of the product, some basic version and top of the range version, and depending on which version has which features and when the various versions are released, this practice feeds the desires of consumers and therefore potentially excessive consumption. Lastly, psychological consumption is the case of goods that are still perfectly functional, clothes, for example, but seem no longer desirable and are discarded early. So these are the 5 types of obsolescence we have in our typology, 4 of which called for policy attention. Again, I will essentially, in the interest of time, skip part 2, where we discuss what sort of product obsolescence raised. We mentioned that clearly it's perceived increasingly as a problem. There's now a lot of empirical evidence of that. We use some economic analysis to show that product obsolescence causes several different types of externalities. We add a layer of behavioral analysis and show that some behavioral phenomena compound the problem as described in economic terms. And we end by a nod to happiness studies and propose that there is also some happiness harm, although that's maybe a little bit more difficult to include in our current policies thinking. So what does the current framework look like? I don't have time to go into the full discussion, so I'll start by giving you the key points of our analysis. as the law stands, regulation of product obsolescence is mostly indirect. It's only very recently, or in some countries, that there is a head-on ban, for example, on product obsolescence. And in the framework of EU law, you have many rules that have some bearing on product obsolescence, and they're quite diverse. The analytical grid we use to look at all these rules consists of two questions. One, what's the impact of those rules on consumer decision? And what's the impact on producer decision? How do they impact sustainable consumption and sustainable production? And we also ask what forms of obsolescence each regulatory instrument can help tackle. Our conclusion from this analysis is that the legal tools for regulating product obsolescence exist, but only planned and technical obsolescence are regulated, and that regulation is weak. So the most direct kind of regulation is through the law of unfair commercial practices. Planned obsolescence is not considered unfair per se, but it can be challenged and has been under Article 7 UCPD as a misleading omission. For example, the failure of Apple to inform consumers that OS updates would reduce battery life or other functionalities of their phone has been held to constitute a misleading omission and resulted in an Italian case in a 10 million euro fine, and in a French case in a 25 million euro settlement. Now, with the modernization directive being transposed, fines are likely to increase. They're set to increase for EU-wide infringement. And so that is a pretty potent tool, but it tackles only planned and possibly functional obsolescence. Now, turning to the tools that help regulate consumer choice and help steer it a little bit towards more sustainable consumption, we have mandatory pre-contractual information, a lot of it under EU law. Now, nothing is on durability directly, but we have three potentially useful legal boxes. One is general disclosure, information that must be disclosed prior to any consumer sale, and the main characteristics of the product must be disclosed, and that could include durability, repairability, and upgradability. It would just need to be specified more clearly. Another regulatory route is product-specific disclosure, and that's coupling minimum durability standards that would be in eco-label regulation with mandatory disclosure. We also have provisions about mandatory legal guarantee, which play a lesser role. So the limitations here are that the EU law focuses on economic interests of consumers. Consumers are protected against overpaying for non-durable goods or useless commercial guarantees, not against obsolescence. So the value is limited against, exists, but is limited against functional obsolescence. And this is of no help at all against other forms of obsolescence. We note that product-specific disclosure, which is very much underused at the moment, has maybe the greatest potential for improving. EU law regulates also voluntary disclosure. So when traders make durability claims, and they can make claims in pictures using logos. And here the current focus is only on making sure that the logos are not misused. When it comes to claim durability claims in words, the focus is to hold the sellers to their word, but sadly the EU law gives an easy way out. So that there are a number of shortcomings here as well. One of which is that zero claims are not made salient. That is, when there are no durability claim at all, there's no tool in EU law to call consumers' attention on this. I'll skip the part on repairs and upgrade because I believe Evelyn Terrein will deal with this extensively tomorrow. The conclusion of—
Anne-Lise, if you can do it in 1 or 2 minutes, it will be very much appreciated. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so the conclusion is that the law has little impact on consumer decision. I'll skip to producer's choice and skip all the low impact regulatory tools. The potential high impact regulatory tool is a extended producer responsibility, which comes from environmental law and is an application of the producer pay principle. It's powerful because it induces producers to reconsider product design, and because it's the only tool that potentially tackles all forms of obsolescence. So our policy recommendations, we make some to better address the forms of obsolescence that are already regulated. Discuss whether we should have a ban, French-style ban. We are in favor of it, essentially because of the expressive function of the law. We know that it will be difficult to enforce because it's difficult to produce proof of obsolescence. And so we really insist that whistleblower protection is essential in this regard. Now, skipping to the less conventional, what's less regulated, what's less considered in the law, the other forms of obsolescence besides planned and functional obsolescence. We think that attention should be focused on extended producer responsibility by modernizing enforcement, increasing sanction, allowing private enforcement, and giving attention to take back schemes that exist for some goods, such as large items or phone. But here the challenge is to make sure that the producers, not the sellers, but bear the cost. Otherwise, the incentives to produce more durable goods will not be aligned with consumer interests. Lastly, and more deeply, there is this attitude action gap that some other speakers have mentioned. Green attitudes are on the rise, but we don't always act upon our good intention. And this has been well documented in relation to repair. And so a behavioral approach would be to do everything we can to make it easy and attractive. So using anything we can do to facilitate repair or self-repair. And these are not gimmicks, because self-repair, for example, has potentially a transformative value. And here I want to quote from an absolutely delightful little book, in which a Buddhist monk says, if you use an object for as long as you can, carefully repairing it when necessary, you will find that not only your relationship with objects begin to change, but also the way you relate to people. And in this vein, the key to real change is probably to address the drivers of overconsumption. And the Buddhist economics, which I discovered as I was researching this paper, has an interesting take on this. It suggests to address the resistance to change and underscores that consumption is often driven by a feeling that we are lacking in some way. We're not doing enough. We are not good enough parents, so we buy more toys. And this is very easy to exploit by marketing. Marketing tells us in many fancy ways, buy this and you'll be beautiful, strong, fill in the blanks. And so the suggestion is, could consumers ask themselves, what need does this purchase really feed? Slightly restated, what joy or suffering is in this object. And by this, they mean not just only external suffering, such as that of Uyghur workers who manufacture the shirt, for example, but also that of the consumer herself. So challenge is, can we include this perspective in marketing regulation, and how can we encourage more mindful consumption? So to wrap up,
and you really have to wrap it up, just for the sake of being fair with the other participants.
2 seconds. E-law contains many tools that can be repurposed to address product obsolescence. And some forms of obsolescence remain easier to regulate than others. And the potential of extended producer responsibility should really be tapped. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Anne-Lise, for basically illustrating how complex the topic is, maybe more than many people think, and I think it's very much linked to consumer awareness as well. So that's a perfect bridge for our next speaker, Emilia Micenik. So Emilia, thank you for joining us today. And as I said earlier, consumer participation in green and circular practices is really considered to be a key building block of product policy. So what is your take on this, and how do you think we can increase consumer awareness in general?
Dear colleague Breezes, thank you very much, and thank you for your lovely introduction. I will try to share my screen now. Just a second. Is it visible? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So, dear colleagues, dear professors, good afternoon to all of you. And as you have heard, my name is Emilia Micenik, and I'm a professor, associate professor at the Faculty of Law, University of Rijeka. So colleague Breezes has introduced us all, and you have heard already that my focus of research is consumer protection primarily. And this is also the reason why I'm very honored and thankful to the Nova School of Law and to the Nova Consumer Lab for accepting me and for allowing me to have the speech at this wonderful conference. In my today's presentation, I will try to investigate to what amount actually information and transparency can contribute to sustainability in B2C relations. As we all know, the term sustainable consumption derives from the term sustainable development, and the most often quoted definition was given by the Brundtland Report, defining it as a development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. It is a known fact that the three words, people, profit, and planet, constitute the three pillars of sustainability. And it is actually the profit and the problems created by the people that are compromising the future of the forthcoming generations. And in this context, the sustainability aims at preservation or French soutenir of the planet in a more holistic and an adaptive manner. The planet we are inhabiting is seriously endangered by excessive consumption and production. And when it comes to B2C relations, both businesses and consumer protection are good for sustainable development, and sustainable development is good for both. Business forms parts of the sustainable development solution, while consumer protection as a horizontal policy supports the realization of many of sustainable development goals. On the other hand, sustainable development supports the long-term business growth strategy and helps consumers to bring sustainable choices when buying products and services. However, the existing legal solutions of the European consumer acquis are rather suitable than sustainable, as they follow the so-called functional approach of the achieving of the internal market goal. What I want to say is that the current legal solutions offered by many EU directives are not suitable for achieving the sustainability in B2C relationships due to the fact that beside the consumer protection, they follow primarily the goal of accomplishment of the internal market. So here's also where the circular economy comes into the play, because the acquis is designed primarily by the rules and the principle of linear economy, which relies on the make, take, use, dispose pattern. So in the contrast to the linear economy, the circular economy, while not entirely a new concept, puts the focus of attention on reuse and recycle, as well as on repair and reduction of the use of products. So although we are witnessing many valuable initiatives at the EU and the global level, what we are still missing are the practical and effective solutions to these issues. So when it comes to consumer protection, there is no systematic approach on how to achieve these goals. The studies are focused on various areas where consumer protection is present as a horizontal policy, such as environment or waste management, durability of products beyond the guarantee period, eco and green labels or designs, and so on. While all these are useful, they often fail to answer what could work best for B2C relationships. But what if there is another important horizontal tool that we could use on a daily basis to promote sustainability? We are all aware of the role which transparency and information play in a consumer protection. Traders' information duty is a key instrument protecting consumers as weaker parties in the B2C relations, and the Court of Justice case law recognizes the fundamental importance of the information and transparency. In particular today, in the time of the digital age, these tools seem to be more important than ever in B2C relationships. As you can see from the Eurostat statistics, there is a significant increase of the online transactions, in particular during the COVID-19 pandemic. However, due to the lack of information and transparency, there is also an increase of misleading advertising and online scams related to products and services. Therefore, the pursued sustainability goals can successfully be achieved only by addressing the both sides of the B2C coin. On the one hand, strengthening of transparency in B2C relationships empowers consumers to opt for more sustainable products. By offering accurate, plain, and intelligible information about the product, traders could contribute significantly to the sustainable development. On the other hand, practices such as misleading advertising and other unfair commercial practices and violations of traders' information duties should be sanctioned more effectively. So first thing first, we should work seriously on raising consumer awareness on sustainable consumption through education, where we as professors and teachers play an important role, by using all available media, and by relying on policymakers who should use their position to promote sustainability. By raising the awareness, we affect the behavior of consumers and we lead them to more responsible and sustainable choices. Secondly, the sustainability doesn't work without transparency in B2C relationships. There are many barriers to sustainable choices, and non-transparency and lack of information is one of the main ones. In practice, consumers often miss essential information about the product they are about to buy. When buying online, these information are hidden in some small corner of the website containing business terms and conditions. Another important barrier to sustainability are the over-exaggerated prices of sustainable products, which do not necessarily correspond to the reality of the manufacturing process. Meaning traders are often using the notion of sustainability to increase the profit. By behaving fairly and transparently, traders would gain the profit simply by gaining the trust and confidence of their customers. And finally, we should not undermine the role of the sanctioning mechanism when it comes to the violation of transparency and information duties. The weak enforcement is the bête noire of the consumer acquis. There were many attempts to address the issue, and the New Deal for consumers and the so-called Omnibus Directive introduced more effective, proportionate, and dissuasive penalties. However, all these mechanisms, including the ADR-ODR regime, are undermined by the flaws of the consumer acquis, which is unsystematic, fragmented, and in this aspect simply badly regulated. To use an example of information duty regulation, here you can see the list of information that the trader is obliged to provide to consumer before the contract conclusion according to Consumer Rights Directive. So my question is, can an average consumer who is reasonably well informed and circumspect and observant, sorry, just to put back the slide, something went wrong. Can a consumer who is reasonably well-informed, circumspect, and observant really understand, absorb all these information, and then bring an informed and sustainable choice? In addition to those, the Omnibus Directive introduced a new set of specific information for contracts concluded on online marketplaces. So in practice, these extensive and even overextensive regulation of information duty often fails to guarantee the transparency in B2C relations. So let us use an example of online shopping where the prescribed information, mandatory informations, are not transparently displayed or received by or given to the consumers. Instead, they form part, as I already mentioned, of business standard contract terms available online, which traders can change unilaterally at any moment. Another good example is labeling as an effective way to affect consumer behavior and choices. Although in recent years, the acquis significantly improved, particularly in the food sector, when ordering online, very often there are no information available about the content of the product. In this sense, the recent proposal of digitalization of product information seem to be rather a threat than to a contribution to a transparency and sustainability. So to conclude with, yes, I believe that transparency and information are the tools for achieving sustainable development goals, but only if regulated, used, and applied properly by all stakeholders involved. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good. Thank you, Emilia. Thank you very much. Okay, now we have at least a few minutes for discussion. So I would like to start first with Carl. There have been a couple of questions popping up in the chat. So one of them, of course, refers to repair. And I think you already touched upon this instrument in your contribution. You know, I would really like your view on this. I know that, for example, in Austria, in some states, they're subsidizing repairs, and I'm sure you've looked into these instruments. I'm wondering if this is the way forward that more countries can do this, and because there are also limits to how many things can countries subsidize as well, of course. Then another element that I would like to hear your views is the inconsistencies and conflicts between different policy goals. I think you already presented a very complex landscape. You know, when we speak about product policies, really so many different pieces of legislation. And I was wondering, what can policymakers do to really address these conflicts? I mean, is it sufficient to conduct a regular ex post and ex ante assessment? I mean, a good example is the chemicals, is the requirements stemming from the chemicals law, and then the goals of utilizing of boosting the reuse and recycling. These goals can be in conflict sometimes. So I'm wondering, how do you think that these conflicts can be reduced? I'm not sure if you have the answer, but at least any thoughts on this will be useful. While I'm giving you a few seconds to prepare, I will ask a couple of questions to Anne-Lise and Emilia, because I don't think we will have a second round, time for a second round of questions. I think, Anne-Lise, you already saw some questions on the chat, one on technical obsolescence, which I think you're preparing a response. Then there's another question on consumption, overconsumption, and whether you have looked into any instruments in this domain. You know, if you have any perspective to provide later. And one comment from myself as well. You presented the complex requirements from general disclosure legislation, and also voluntary requirements for producers. You know, going into the manufacturer's kind of a place, if assuming that. You know, do you think that there's perhaps too many of these requirements and they create like complexity while not having a good effect in the end, because you mentioned in the end of the impact has been little. So I'm wondering, is there any scope for streamlining or all these requirements? And I don't know if you have any ideas or suggestions in this regard. And finally, Emilia, when it comes to transparency, I think it's a very important and kind of a topic that pops up very often in discussions. But of course, transparency is very broad. So it's a question of prioritize. What do we mean by transparency? Are we referring to origins of products, components in products, chemical substances, sustainability impacts? There's so many different things. And the Commission is planning a product passport, as we heard in the beginning of the conference as well. And in the beginning of course, technically, some areas will need perhaps to be prioritized. So I was wondering, from your perspective, if you have any views on which aspects could be prioritized, at least in the first phase of such a product passport. So, Carl, would you like to start? Yeah.
I'll try to be brief then. First thing is repairs. I mean, like we said, the key thing is durability, and then you combine it with repairs. Some initiatives are very interesting. I like the Repair Network Vienna, but I partly like it because it's controversial. Only companies in the network who has to qualify you can only use the repair vouchers there for these companies. So it's a competition effect that is very controversial, but that's also why we like it. So if you can have these effective tools, consumers trust these companies and network because they've been screened, and only these companies can get the benefits. This is what makes it controversial but very interesting. So I think we should go for some of these policies that are effective, but they also challenge the market, you know. So for instance, in order to qualify, you need to serve 3 different brands. You can't serve one brand. I think then you come to policy conflicts. I mean, some conflicts are hard to resolve. Let's say there are chemicals in recycled plastics. You can resolve some of them. You can say, if you have industrial products, you can allow more flame retardants, but if it's consumer products or toys, you cannot. So some conflicts are resolvable to some extent, others are not. The problem is, I think, when we start to still talk about plastic recycling up to 100% as if it's gonna happen, which is not gonna happen. It's just a stalling tactic. While at the same time, for instance, if you look at producer responsibility, you still allow plastics to have a low recycling level than the other materials. If you're serious about plastics in a circular economy, they should have the same requirements as glass or metal. So we are a little bit, you know, mixing the cards here, we should have a more straight, if plastic is part of the solution, show that, you know. Don't pretend like we're going to recycle 100% of this crap stuff. It's never going to happen. So some policy conflicts we can resolve, some are tricky. And then we have these ones that will be resolved. For instance, it makes more sense to replace a product for a more energy efficient one in Poland than in Norway, because in Poland, the electricity based on fossil, and in Norway, it's based on water power. So these things will be resolved because there's a natural tendency to green electricity, and to the difference in energy efficiency between generations will be smaller and smaller. So some of these things are sort of going to work out themselves, I guess. That was the short answer.
Okay, good. Thanks, Hal. I guess the organizers will be okay to spend just 5 more minutes to allow Anne-Lise and Emilia to provide a few remarks. So Anne-Lise, among all of these questions that I raised and any other things you want to raise, please, the floor is yours.
So maybe regarding the, well, there's one question I answered in writing in the interest of time. Joshua, thanks you for your question about how could we stop consumers from overcompensating by additional purchases and preventing psychological obsolescence. I think the law can do very little in this regard, especially not consumer law. Rather, maybe if we taught mindfulness in schools, that might, in the long run, be more effective. And as to your question, Vasily, Joseph, as streamlining information requirement, I'm all for it, but clearly there is resistance on the part of the EU, because this was already on the agenda when the consumer refit happened, and no streamlining of pre-contractual information happened. So, okay, if it doesn't, it's not the end of the world, because anyway, what I try to show is that we really need to work on the incentives for producers. All the information requirement weigh on sellers. And so I think what we really need to do is shift our attention on incentives to producers.
Okay. Good. Thank you, Anne-Lise. Very, very useful perspective. So, Emilia, you will have the privilege also of closing the contributions by the panelists. Yeah.
Thank you, colleague Brizus, or if I may use your name directly, Vasilos. Thank you also for your interesting question. Of course, as you have seen from the presentation, yes, you have the point. The information duty and transparency issue is a very broad one, and it goes into all areas of consumer protection acquis. But as I have already accentuated, there are several issues as I see it from my perspective or from consumer law perspective. So I will try to be short. I think when you ask very concretely which area it's supposed to be addressed. I think when looked from the consumer perspective, it should be product labeling. I think this is one of the areas which could use to consumers, or to at least to this average consumer. But also, I mean, not only the product labeling, but also as a very interesting example, I have used the Consumer Rights Directive, which was amended by the Omnibus Directive, and all these information duties when buying online, because these days we have seen we are more and more buying online. So the pre-contractual information duty, and as also already heard by Anne-Lise, is very important. And I think that in this regard, the acquis needs to be improved, because what is the point of the whole system and of this very important tool of the consumer protection acquis if it is not in reality protecting consumer or is misused by traders, which is again sanctioned by another directive, as we have already heard, UCPD. So I mean, the pre-contractual information duties are useful to consumers when buying online, but they should certainly be reduced, I would say, to some essential information. The whole system of informing consumer should be more transparent. So I'm joking that the tool for transparency is actually need to be more transparent and needs to be focused on essential information for the consumer. Otherwise, the consumers and they end up more confused than informed. So the system and the regulation as it is now, I don't think it actually really helps or guarantees the sustainable choices. And yes, the example you have seen, they are more or less hidden when you are buying online, and they are not really given all these information. There are so many of them. We were all confused. You were not able to see even those bold letters, which had something to do with sustainability or information about the products, because they are usually not directly given to consumer, but they are somewhere in the business standard contract terms. So this information duty, the traders are actually not using them really as a tool to help consumers. I think maybe I have complicated the answer, but
no, that was very useful. Yeah, I mean, if we had more time, we will go more in depth in all of these issues, but it's impossible, and I think we already have gone beyond the time. And at least I hope we managed to gather some useful insights. And I personally myself, I enjoyed it very much. So we cannot take all of the questions from the audience. There are some further questions there, but I'm sure we will be able to continue these discussions in other contexts. So to close, first of all, I would like to thank Carl, Anne-Lise, and Emilia for your time and for having this discussion. And as I said earlier, I will be happy to continue these interesting exchanges, let's say. I would also like to thank, of course, the organizers from the Nova Consumer Lab and also Anna Silva, of course, for inviting me to moderate this session. I also attended some of the other sessions and I gained some interesting insights. And of course, I would like to thank all of you at Zoom. Most of you stayed until the end, so I guess that was interesting. So thank you all, and we stay in touch, and hope to see you also perhaps physically at some point. Okay, good. Thank you.
Hi, many thanks to all the speakers, moderators, and the audience for being here today. It was a long day, but I think rather stimulating. And I think we had a really interesting discussions on circular economy. And we will continue tomorrow with the other themes of the conference. So tomorrow, the first session on consumer law and sustainability will begin at 9:20 Lisbon time. That is 10:20 Central European time. So stay safe and hope to see you again tomorrow. Bye.